We're at our hickory tree where the ownership, Fifth Element, has asked us to go ahead and spread this topsoil, and we wanted to use this as an example of how we must have additional material to put on this critical root zone before any additional incorporation is done. We're still what you might say in the acquisition stage of the organic matter and the topsoil necessary to cover a very thin critical root zone. And let me illustrate to you by showing that we've got, this is as far as I can go, and I can only get 3 or 4 inches. We need 6, 8, 9 inches as a example of the kind of decompaction that we're wanting. And I'm going to do a core test with my core sampler. And we can see that we've got very hard, rocky conditions with just a small amount of topsoil here, less than a half an inch I would say, and the rest of it is this clay here that is non-porous. And what we've done is use the hub and spoke pattern to aerate and decompact, and before we do any incorporation or topsoil formation, we're going to have to take these piles of topsoil that have been placed here in bulk, dump truck here, and we're going to spread those out, and then we're going to use the air tool to incorporate and begin the process of topsoil formation. But we cannot do that until it's spread and we've got a substantial layer. Let me show you just as an example. As I come down here and I show you that we've got hard packed soil, and here are some roots. You can see them growing straight up out of the ground. They're right here. Here they are right there. That's a good example, and you can see that they're right there. They're starting to form in the trenches, and if we were to aerate this without covering it, we would expose these valuable clumps here and these roots to very hot, dry conditions, and chances are they would dry out and we would do more damage than good. So pay attention. We're going to use bulk acquired topsoil, spread it out, and then start the topsoil formation process by incorporation with our air tool. In establishing topsoil skirts in a cheap-to-keep tree and landscape, we're basically trying to counteract continued forces of compaction. Soil compaction within the root zone of a tree is usually confined to the upper layers. In other words, that top 4 or 5 inches, and that top 4 or 5 inches, strangely enough, is usually the fill dirt that was taken from the home's a driveway, a sidewalk, foundation, and spread out over the site. Or if it's an established home site, it's fill dirt that has eroded and washed down the hill, as we've seen in several of our examples that we use to illustrate to you in this session. And so identifying compactions is a critical step in creating your good growing conditions. And what you're going to find is what we refer to as a soil interface, and that is an abrupt change from where the fill dirt comes down to the true ground level, and then the true ground level down from there is usually a different soil consistency, and it is a sharp and distinct joint between two different horizons, and is the result of a dramatic change in soil formation. It usually shows where the humans, your family, or the business that you're servicing has gotten involved and spread it out. Now, water lubricates the soil particles and makes them easier to push together and compact. And so with wet soil,
the pressure that you put on it. If you drive over, walk over, or park on top of wet soil, that wet soil compacts even worse. You're going to use mulch layers to stimulate the biological activity and retain moisture, and it helps the soils recover from compaction. And this is all a part of establishing the black dirt mulch skirts that will form soil and become topsoil over a period of time, nourishing your cheap to keep trees and landscapes. The benefits of a healthy soil food web, and that's what we're talking about when you have formed topsoil with roots and organisms and all of the microbiological elements necessary to balance it, are many. All of these make it easier for the roots to grow and obtain nutrients and water. Now, the fifth element's design intent should be long-term health, and if so, organic soil amendments in many of your urban environments will be needed to balance soil chemistry, because we've interrupted the natural cycle of trees and bushes shedding their leaves, dropping into the critical root zone, and they lay there where they ferment and then turn into composted organic rotted material for the tree to feed on. Since we clean that up, we're going to now acquire these rotted materials, usually somewhere else, and place them into the critical root zone, and this is your missing link to the long-term soil fertility and hence the cheap to keep tree and landscape that every homeowner wants. Don't want to spend a lot of money, don't want to spend a lot of time, I don't want to have a lot of risk of injury or damage that is going to cost me money. And so fertility is enhanced by feeding the soil, not the plant. We'll feed the plant focused in the spot where it will do the most good, next to the roots that we've located using our tree preservation actions. The chemicals, while being a good short-term solution, are not sustainable. They damage the soils and they create weak root systems. And we're going to talk about how this encourages insect infestation, disease, and makes them subject to extreme weather in our next 2 sessions of biostimulation and inoculation. A little more appropriate to talk about it there. But to revive dead and compacted soil, we acquire, we incorporate, and we form the topsoil with supersonic air and with the amended materials that we put in there to make them balanced and fertile. Carefully managed soil building increases organic matter and humus. The number of active processes recycles nutrients, it improves water retention, balances minerals, and buffers the pH. And we're going to be talking about pH more in our next biostimulation. But our composted, rotted material is the key element that you put in to establishing the dirt skirts around your subject trees to make this a cheap to keep tree and landscape. In the 3 tree preservation actions we've discussed up to this point, your root collar excavation, your aeration and decompaction, and your topsoil formation, establishing the topsoil skirts around your trees, give you the ability to begin to control the conditions that dictate the health, long-term, short-term health, and disease resistance and insect resistance of the trees. Now, our ANSI standards, American National Standards Institute, Part 1 and 2, 5 and 6, 8 and 9, I would suggest that you refer to them, especially when it comes to the 2 to 4 inches that's recommended as a depth that is to be maintained. You can start with more if you like, because if there's adequate amounts of water in the critical root zones of these dirt skirts, you're going to find that that layer rots down rather quickly. And when you end up with 2 or 3 inches, then that is the point at which you can begin to come back in, acquire additional materials, either locally or haul them in from another site, incorporate them just as you've seen us do in our examples here, and accelerate, stimulate, and animate the process of soil formation and feeding the tree. Give the trees, the larger bushes, and the groups of living things growing in the designed ecosystem access to the nutrients that they need. And the money that you can save the homeowner or the business owner is substantial in water savings, in what you can save by recycling materials and forming topsoil on site, water conservation, the energy savings, climate control, and the other benefits of wildlife habitat, privacy, cleaner, quieter, calmer air, buffers between them, the traffic and the road. These are all ecosystem services which come directly to them as a result of these actions that you're performing under the trees, around the bushes, and in every other living thing in the environment outside the front and the back doors of their house or their business. Before we go on to our next 2 tree preservation actions of biostimulation and inoculation, it's important for me to remind you that when you see us demonstrating and illustrating a lot of these actions, we are in fact combining many of these all together at the same time. And when you use the 10 steps of the Cheap to Keep Trees and Landscapes protocol, the reason we promote it, the reason we've used it, the reason we depend on it so heavily is that it gives us an organized way to record the data, relate it to the customer, and begin to add information to it as the designed ecosystem constantly changes. To say nothing of the constantly changing lifestyle of the family or of the business that happens to occupy that site. And so this is a very dynamic, fluid situation that is always changing, and using a protocol that is repeatable time after time after time gives you, the contractor, the consultant in this process, control and authority. It puts you in the driver's seat, and using and being backed by the best management practices of American National Standards Institute and all of our industries puts you in as strong a position as you possibly can to differentiate you from your competition. That's what you want, because in the new normal, where you have heightened customer expectations and less money to pay for it, they're going to go with the people they can trust, that will deliver what they promise, and know without any doubt that they're not going to gamble with their money and expose them to any more risk or cost than is possible. And so there is your goal. The Cheap to Keep Trees and Landscape protocol will get you there quicker than any other method on the market today.